One, and we are recording as the post YouTube saga continues with episode 552 with Mr. Michael Vecchione. And because I'm going to butcher it as always, please introduce yourself as well as tell everyone about the books you've written.
Well, my name is Michael Vecchione, as Tom said, and I am now the retired chief of the Rackets Division from the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. I've been out of there for a few years now, and I've been an attorney and a prosecutor, as well as a defense attorney for about 40 years. I have done several books now, 4 when the next one comes out, which will be in the spring. I've done several short stories, and waiting to hear from Hollywood about one of my books, and actually 2 of the books. So that's it. I'm very excited. I can't wait to get started. I have an idea that how I'm going to structure my next book. I have as you well know, Tom, I have a lot of stories. Mm-hmm. All those years and doing what I did, I can't help but collect stories, and I have a lot.
Yeah.
And I, you know, you read Crooked Brooklyn, which was the second book that I did. And it basically was a collection of stories from the time when I was chief of the Rackets Division. But one led to the other, and there was sort of a connection. So I've been told by people now in publishing that, you know, a series of short stories in a book or a collection of short stories, they don't think I'd be able to sell, or my agent would be able to sell. So I got in a piece of advice from a guy who is an agent, who said, you know, Mike, the thing is that at the end of a story, if you can connect it some way to the next story, well, then that will solve your problem, or should solve your problem. So I've come up with an idea that that actually unfortunately my deceased friend Jerry, who wrote with me, and I worked on several years ago, and it had to do with an evil force coming to Brooklyn, and the cases that I had been working on and I had been doing were part of this evil force's way of taking over and creating chaos in New York City. And so I'm thinking that may be my nexus from one story to the next. So we'll see. But that's who I am, Tom. And I hope that and I've been on with you, and I thank you again for having me on.
Yeah, man, of course.
And I really look forward to this, and I hope that your listeners and viewers like what I have to say. So that's it. That's who I am.
With Crooked Brooklyn, Behind the Murder Curtain, Friends of the Family, and like you said, a lot of short stories that you're right, if you could tie together, would form another book. Correct.
And the new book is called Homicide is My Business, about a mafia hitman who quote unquote I befriended during my time, because he came to me as a kind of a sad sack and was looking for help, because he had really made a very, very lethal mistake, lethal for him in terms of being able to live a long, fulfilling life. And it's a really, I think, a terrific story. I really do. And I'm anxious to get it out. In fact, I got a note today from my editor. Actually, during this week, I got several notes. They're in the process of editing, and they sent me the edited version, wanted to know if I agreed with the edits, change them, add to them, etc. So, and I got another note today about it. I wrote a section that I call In Memoriam to Jerry. I thought it was necessary for me to do that. It was kind of my way of saying goodbye, and to acknowledge, you know, what he has meant to me as both a friend and as a mentor and as a colleague. So we were talking about that today, my editor and I. So that's it. And the short stories are coming. I think that this will work. And if it does, then there'll be another book.
Oh yeah.
Sometime after Homicide is My Business. So
for everyone listening, I'll put those books in the description. Obviously, as always, I listen to Crooked Brooklyn on Audible, and then there's Behind the Murder Curtain, Friends of the Family, which I believe are on Kindle, which you can I'll do it again. I'll explain it another time. For everyone listening, you can take Kindle books and turn them into audiobooks with your phone and your iPad. It's the robot voice, but it works. for the short stories we've done Hand of the Killer. We've done
Murder on the Bridge.
Murder on the Bridge. I always butcher that one.
Right.
And I want to say we've done one more before today's.
Well, we talked about one that that was kind of it came up in the course of our discussion regarding interrogations.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. That one wasn't. That was
so-
the last episode. That wasn't like, yeah, that wasn't necessarily a short story. That was just kind of more
Right.
of a free for all. Me asking questions and Mike shooting me down. Me being like, if I just tell the cops the truth, and no, shut your mouth, shut your
Exactly.
goddamn mouth. And you know what? All right, I'll shut my mouth. And but today's is a short story,
Right.
and it's about. Well, I don't want to spoil. It's in the title, so I won't spoil. It's about how a swarm of bees ultimately busted a guy for having an underground marijuana facility. But because I have you here, how about you take it away, Mike?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that when we did this investigation, it was back when marijuana and the sale of marijuana was illegal in the state of New York. Certainly in Brooklyn. It's not that long ago, but it's around the time that I retired in 2013, 2014. It started, the name, let me give you the name, because I think the name is kind of a name that really
Catchy.
people will swarm to.
Fuck
It's
you.
called-
This is
it's
over.
called-
This
Yeah.
podcast is over. You're never coming back on here. You get one pun. You get one.
There
And
you go.
every future listener and future guest, take note. You get one. Charlie Duke used "out of this world" when talking about being on the moon, and that was his first strike.
There you go. Well,
There's your one strike. I'm kidding. Go on.
okay. And the name of the story will be, because I haven't written the whole thing yet, is the name is the Red Bees of Red Hook. And I know that people are saying red bees. What are you talking about? There are no red bees. Well, let me tell you the story. There is I would say probably around 2011, 2012, in that area, the city and particularly the DA's offices were really struggling as far as their budgets were concerned. And what was happening is there was a kind of a disparity between the amount of forfeiture by criminals of money and assets, et cetera, in Manhattan, and a very, very big disparity between what they were able to recover in forfeiture and the other boroughs. Manhattan has Wall Street, and it has so many it's the center of so many industries that if people commit crimes in those industries, banking and other financial areas of our economy, well, you could see how their forfeiture is very, very lucrative. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, if someone commits a crime, let's say a theft like Bernie Madoff, okay? Madoff commits a crime and he steals through whatever method, in his method, it was a Ponzi scheme, from people, and steals millions and millions of dollars. Then when he's caught and convicted, there is the ability for the state, the prosecutor, to seek forfeiture from him. And that means that he or his organization would have to come up with the amount of money that's agreed upon by the prosecutors and essentially cough it up to the government. And what the government does with it is it uses it to pay back victims, et cetera. Now, if there are no victims, then the money that's forfeited by the criminal goes into the budget of the particular district attorney's office. So you can imagine that a potential multi-million-dollar forfeiture is something that a DA would be very interested in, particularly when his budget is being curtailed or is not as high as he would like it to be, or she would like it to be. So that was the atmosphere that I was in, and I was chief of rackets, and I one day got a visit from one of our detective investigators in the office, a great guy named Greg DeBoer. And Greg was a sharp investigator who always kept his eyes open, ears open for, potential cases. He got a call from a former investigator from the office who was now working for the postal authorities. He was a postal inspector. and they are federal agents. And the federal agent, the postal inspector, had an informant who was looking to work off, as informants usually do, looking to work off a problem that he had. And he gave him a tip. He said, the informant said to the postal inspector, I work in a place that is a factory. So the inspector said, well, what do they make? They make maraschino cherries. Now, again, I'm sure your listeners know what I'm talking about, but those are the little cherries that get dropped into drinks like Shirley Temples or Manhattans, or, drinks that a bar would just simply drop that cherry. And those things are, those cherries are what were manufactured in this particular factory
For
that this guy worked at.
For the younger people, it's the much younger people. It's right. That's the ice cream sundae cherry.
That's the what?
The ice cream sundae cherry.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I used my point of view.
Mike's like, when you're dropping it in alcohol.
Right. But they're also, yes, they used in ice cream parlors, et cetera, to put on top of sundaes.
Sure.
And I had no idea when this guy told me, let me step back. So he told the inspector, the postal inspector, that he believes his boss is raising marijuana in the basement of the factory. Now, it may seem to you and to your listeners and viewers that, well, so what? The guy has a little small marijuana patch down in his factory, right? Or in his basement. Well, it turns out that the factory that this guy was talking about was 1 square block in Brooklyn. Now, that is a large facility. And the postal inspector didn't have jurisdiction because obviously it didn't fit into his framework of what he could investigate. And he came to us and called his buddy, Greg, and said to Greg, listen, this is what I've got. And it might be interesting. And Greg came to me and said, Mike, look, this is the information I have. If it's true and we can get this, then we can seize the building and sell it for forfeiture. And do you know how much that would have been? Millions and millions of dollars. I mean, that meant that we could use it to buy new equipment. You can use it to hire new investigators. You could hire new assistant DAs. You could give ADAs a raise. You can modernize, your whole operation with this stuff, with that kind of money.
There's a hilarious parallel between like business, right? You open up a new plant, you make money, you reinvest it in the business, you get better equipment, hire better people, better headhunters, and you can open up a new factory. It's just like the parallel. Well, if we get this, we can have more investigation. And it's just like the business doesn't give a shit. It's just going either which way. Sorry, go on.
Exactly. So that's exactly it. So I said, well, look, Greg, we got some work to do, because one guy's word, and he's a little disgruntled or he's working off a case, that's not enough to make a case. So I said, why don't we start very simply? Talk to this guy and see what you think of him. And Greg did. He spoke to him and he said, Mike, he came back to me and said, listen, I to tell you the truth, I believe this guy. He coming up with information that, only someone who was actually in that factory and working there would know. Said, okay. So he said, but you know what? I don't want to completely take his word for it. Investigators are skeptical to begin with. And I agree with that, because they can't just take someone's word for it. So he said, let me go in to the factory and see if I can smell the odor that this informant claims is pervasive in a certain part of the factory. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, there's an area in the factory that has a pipe that runs from the basement all the way through to the roof. And he said, the pipe is not airtight. It's not enclosed in anything. And if you go by it, you can smell the marijuana. It's a pervasive smell. I said, go ahead. So Greg did. He talked his way into the factory, which was a very difficult thing to do. And I'll explain that later, but he talked his way in and he made his way to this pipe where he where the informant claimed he could smell the marijuana. He came back to me and said, Mike, there is no doubt that marijuana is down below wherever that pipe comes from. No doubt at all. I said, all right, but we need a warrant. I mean, your smelling it doesn't give us enough and the informant doesn't give us enough. We need to have something more. And I made sure I was correct about that by going to an assistant DA who was our quote, I guess the kind of the legal advisor to the rackets division. I took her from the appeals bureau, who were the legal nerds in the office who do the appeals. And I asked her to come down to the rackets division and be part of our division and to advise us on questions like this. So she agreed with me. She said, you need a warrant. You can't just bust into the place. You have nothing other than a smell. And this guy, it's just not enough. And we might not even get a warrant with that information. We're going to need more. So I said, let's talk to this guy again and see what else there is. So Greg tells me that he went back and spoke to the informant, and the informant told him that about something that I had never heard of before. And the reason that this becomes important is one of the ideas that I had, and one of the other assistant DAs who worked on the case with me had, was to check out the usage, the electrical usage of the building to see, whether or not it's out of line with what a factory like that should be. And we would get an expert in to give us the information. So what we did was, first thing we had to do was to get the plans of the building. So I sent the investigators to the city. They got the building plans from the building department. And Greg walked into my office one day and said, I could see something was wrong. I said, what's up? He said, Mike, there's no basement on these plans. There's no basement. It's not listed. It doesn't appear on the building plans. So I took it the opposite way. I said, that's the greatest thing, because clearly what this guy must have done is he either paid off an inspector in the city, or they slipped these plans past the city inspectors to get the occupancy, the certificate of occupancy, without divulging the fact that there was this basement down there, because he had a purpose for that basement that he didn't want anybody to know. But we then checked the electricity, and the electricity wasn't out of whack. It wasn't so high that someone could say, well, he's got all kinds of marijuana plants down in the basement, and he's using hydroponic lights to grow them. It didn't appear on the bills, Tom. So we were now kind of stumped. I said, go back to the informant and see if he's got some kind of explanation. And sure enough, he did. Apparently, in a certain part of the factory, walled off from everybody who walked into the place, was a large, I'll call it a garage, but it didn't house cars or trucks or delivery trucks. It housed two enormous Volvo generators
Jesus.
that were connected to in our opinion, connected to the hydroponic lights down in the basement that was able to power what was going on in that basement. When we asked the informant about them, he said that he knew about them, but he said nobody is allowed to go into that area under any circumstance. He said, even if something happens to the generator, let's say one day it just doesn't work properly and he calls the repairman in, only the owner and the repairman go into this garage or this area that I'll call the garage, to fix it. He didn't want anybody to have any connection to those generators, because obviously put two and two together, you're going to come up with four. So that solved one mystery, which was the electricity. To me, the basement, no basement on the building plans, was a great thing, not a bad thing. we still had to figure out a way of getting into this place so that we could get into the basement. Now, one of the things that we found out was that the fire department, as part of their duties, goes to this factory, as it does with every building in the city of New York, to do an inspection, to make sure that they've got smoke detectors, that they are not violating the rules in terms of exits, all that kind of stuff, right? So we said, great. Let's see if the fire department has any knowledge. And we sent Greg to the local firehouse. They looked at him like he had two heads. They said, what are you talking about? Well, first of all, we didn't even know there was a basement, and we never went to any basement. And so we said, there is. What happens if we send you back into the place with the knowledge that there's a basement, and you want to go down there, and that will solve our issue. You'll be able to tell us what you see. I said, before you do that, let me go back and talk to my advisor, my legal advisor. So she said to me, Mike, if they had gone down there on their own as part of their regular duties and saw it, that's great. But you can't send them there because you don't have the right to send them there, because if you did have the right, then you could do it yourself, but you can't use another agency to kind of circumvent the search and seizure statutes that exist in New York State. So that ended that idea. We couldn't send the fire department down there. So what happened next is I got this, the postal inspector came up with an idea. He said, we have a drug sniffing dog that I will lend to you guys and to the investigation. And we'll have the handler at night, when the factory there's no people around, and we'll have them walk the perimeter of the factory to see if the dog hits. I said, great, this is terrific. And you know what I'm talking about. The drug sniffing dogs work in the airports, and the Port Authority and the postal inspectors use it to inspect packages that come in on freight and stuff like that. So they went out one night and came back the next morning, smiles on their face. The dog hit. The dog smelled what we expected him to smell, or her. I don't remember which one it was. It was a female or a male. And Mike, there's no doubt that's marijuana down there. Said, terrific. Now I think we have enough for a warrant. I went back to my advisor. She tells me, you would have, except about a week and a half before I did this, the United States Supreme Court said that drug sniffing dogs alone, the reaction of a drug sniffing dog is not enough to use for a warrant. So we were out of that. We were done with that. So you can imagine the frustration, because we were talking about, as I said before, Tom, millions of dollars. And it was something that I did not want to give up. So I said to the guys, I got the investigators in, and I said, listen, how did it get this stuff out of there? Yeah. Because, you know, he's not selling it from the place. He's got to be shipping it everywhere. I said, well, you know, he's got trucks leaving there every single day with maraschino cherries. And by the way, this particular factory was rather old. It was in business for a very, very long time. The owner's grandfather started it. He was an immigrant from Italy, came over and started the business. Then it went through the grandfather, the father, and now the son, and their names were Mandela. So I said, listen, Mandela's got trucks. He's sending all of this stuff out because he was selling these maraschino cherries. He was the largest distributor of it on the Eastern Seaboard. I mean, he was sending trucks from Brooklyn down south, up north. So I said, there must be a way that he's hiding the marijuana. And I still believe that's the case. Yeah. In those trucks. I said, we got to be able to stop the trucks. So here's what we got to do. We got to have surveillance on the factory. And every time a truck leaves the garage, you guys have to follow it and see. They said to me, well, Mike, why are we going to stop him? We can't stop him and just because he's driving a truck. And we can't stop him with the knowledge that there may be marijuana on there because we don't know. So we came up with the idea of looking for some kind of violation. Maybe the truck is not inspected, or the truck has a broken taillight, or, you know, I don't know, some kind of problem with the truck that didn't fit with federal guidelines. We tried, Tom. We were out for night after night after night. Every truck was pristine. There were no problems. We couldn't stop any of the trucks. So that was another idea that went by the boards. And I'm sure that everybody who's listening to this saying, you guys must be idiots. I mean, you can't get this guy. You can smell the marijuana. The dog hit. You know what's going on down there. And you got the Volvo generators. But what we didn't have with the Volvo generators is because we couldn't see them and we're only told about them, we couldn't see where they were connected and how they were connected. It had to be through the floor down to the basement.
Well, the very reason, you know, at first glance, they might say, what are you guys, idiots? But no, I would say that what it is it's like that's your constitution and those are your state laws protecting you for the fact that you do have to have, you can't just go on a hunch. That's Gestapo shit. That's correct. You have to have a reason. If you can't find anything, maybe they're looking at me. They're going, what is with this kid's apartment? I mean, I used a ton of electricity. I've got soundproof panels. I keep the air conditioner at 60. They're probably like, something's going on in there. But the reality is it's just me doing podcasts. But those are the things that protect you. So it's not goofy Keystone Cops. That's how airtight, knock on wood, the laws are in this country to protect you, the citizen, not allow someone to just go, I heard they smelled pot. Fuck it. Go kick in the doors.
Correct. And if we were a law enforcement agency that didn't care about the law, we would have done exactly that. But that's not the way we operated. So we're kind of hit a brick wall every time we turned around. It was so difficult to break through this. We needed the search warrant in order to get in there. We kept talking to the to the informant, and he kept us up to date on what was going on, but he couldn't see anything because nobody was allowed in the basement. But he confirmed for us that there was a basement. That much we do. And the smell coming from below the floor of the first floor led us to believe that there was a basement. Not only believe, but to know there was a basement down there. So we kind of were at our wit's end. And we had a guy, George Terra, who was the deputy chief investigator in the office, who worked with me, and he's mentioned in Crooked Brooklyn, and he's just the guy that I kind of hit it off with, and we worked on a lot of cases together. So George said to me, look, Mike, how about we do this? Let me send my guys to one of the neighboring roofs and see if the information that we received, that the pipe was used as an exhaust pipe, is true. Let's see if there's a pipe. We'll send Greg up to one of the roofs. He can look at the building plans. He'll know kind of where that pipe is in the building and see where on the roof it comes out, if it comes out at all. And then we'll go up to the roof and we'll smell it, and that will give us enough information. So I ran it once again past my legal advisor. She said, Mike, you can't do that. You can't go on the guy's roof without a warrant. You can't just go up there and walk around. It's the same thing as if you were going inside his building. You can't do it without a warrant. But I did send Greg up to the roof, and sure enough, not that roof, but a neighboring roof, to see if at least if the pipe was there. That's the first thing. The pipe was there. He did see it. There's no doubt that it was the pipe that he had smelled and stood next to in the factory. But she said, no, can't do it. So we had one last idea. And this was, I thought, George's an ingenious idea by George. He said, let's get the PD helicopter and drop a probe down from the helicopter into the pipe and let it gather whatever it can gather, and I don't know what kind of probe we had in mind at that point, and then have it tested and see if it can tell us if that's marijuana exhaust, so to speak. I said, George, that's terrific. That's great. Can you get the helicopter? He said, yeah, I'm already ahead of you. They'll do it for us. I already got somebody who can tell me what kind of probe we can send. All I need is you're okay to go do it. I said, before I do that, let me check with the legal expert. Guess what she said?
No,
Can't do it.
It's yeah.
Owner has air rights
Yeah.
above the building. And the air rights are protected as like the inside of the building, like the roof. You can't do it without having the probable cause to do it. And you can't get the probable cause unless you have information that there's marijuana down there. So we were stymied. I mean, I didn't know what else we could possibly do. And I'm telling you, Tom, we're talking about probably the better part of 6 to 8 months, maybe even longer, close to a year, when all of this was going on. And Greg was so frustrated himself that he would go back to the building, pretending to be, someone other than himself, just so that he could make sure and reassure himself that he smelled what he smelled. And he always would come back and say, Mike, there's no doubt about it. But we had no way of getting in, Tom. We had no way of getting in. And I was frustrated as beyond belief. Other things were happening. There were other cases that were going on. You read Crooked Brooklyn. You see how busy I was in terms of locking up judges and politicians and all kinds of stuff. So it was the time. It was a time of great frustration, and everybody who was involved in the investigation was as frustrated as I was. They would come in every day almost and say, I got this other idea, and let's talk about this, and let's see. The informant couldn't help us. We tried to get him to go to the basement. He said, Mandela will kill me if I try to go down. He won't let me go down there. Nobody can go down there. So we kind of had to let it sit by kind of put it on the back burner, and we were off on other things, locking up judges, as I said, and politicians. And it was, it was something that would have been terrific if we had had the ability to get in there. So I just didn't want to let it go, but I had to. I mean, I had no choice. So in between one of these cases that I was doing, I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was in the middle of the corruption investigation involving, as I said before, the judges, politicians, etc. I pick up the New York Times. Now, that's a very unusual thing for me to do because I was not a Times reader, and I am not a Times reader now. I mean, to me, the Times was nothing but a rag as far as I'm concerned, and still is.
Yeah.
But it was on my desk every morning. It was part of what I was able to get, the local newspapers and the Times and Wall Street Journal, etc. And something caught my eye on the front page of the Times, a story about a beekeeper who had a hive on an island in New York Harbor called Governor's Island. Now, let me try to explain to your audience what Governor's Island is and where it is. It's, if you know where this or kind of have a vision of where the Statue of Liberty is, that's in New York Harbor on Liberty Island. Then there is another big island called Ellis Island in the same area, which is where immigrants came in from Europe and Asia, etc. during the immigration.
Probably where his grandpa came in.
And where my grandpa came in. My grandmother came in. It was, Ellis Island.
Actually, probably same with actually, I don't know why I'm like, wait, no, I'm from Ireland. I'm a dirty Irishman. Of course, that's where they came from.
Yeah, of course. It is. In that group of 2 or 3 of these 3 islands is another island called Governor's Island. And it did have a military base on it, etc. But it was closed The military base was abandoned and it became property. I don't know. I think the government, federal government, gave it to New York City, and the city opened it. And it's a place now where a ferry runs and you can picnic and you can play
Mhm.
volleyball, you can play baseball, you can run around, you can just simply admire the harbor. And it's really a terrific place. And there was a woman who had a hive, and she was in business, and she kept all of these bees on Governor's Island. Now I have to give you a little bit more geography. The island is situated directly opposite, across the East River, not that far, but across the East River from Red Hook, Brooklyn, where the factory was. Okay. And the factory was was like a half a block away from the coast, from the river. So if you stood outside the factory and looked across the East River to Governor's Island, you could look across the East River, you could see Governor's Island. So this woman had kept her bees and things were wonderful. She was selling honey and she did a lot of things, until a time came when she noticed that and of course the bees would leave the hive, obviously, and go do their bee thing and come back and make honey. But she saw at one point that the bees were coming back to the hive on Governor's Island red. They were not yellow any longer. Their bodies were all red. She couldn't figure out what was wrong. She thought there was some kind of a disease. She did all kinds of testing. She ran things past people scientists who were versed in this area, and nobody could figure out what was wrong. They tested the bees. They weren't sick. Until one day, she herself read something in a local newspaper about the Maraschino cherry factory that was across the river from Governor's Island in Red Hook. And it was some kind of either they were having some kind of an event, or there was some festival, something, I don't remember exactly what it was, or an advertisement. And she got the idea. She said, let me see if this is the source of the redness for my bees. So she went to Red Hook, and she thought, how could the bees get inside this building? It's not going to be, that's not possible. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of bees. We're not talking about just like one or two bees that you see in a garden every once in a while.
Sure.
So how are they going to get into this? How did they get into this building? Well, she went there and she asked around. She was able to speak to Mandela, and she found out that there was a discharge from the building that ran out literally onto the street near the factory, into the drain that led into the East River. What was in that? What was the runoff? It was red dye. The dye used to make the regular cherry into a maraschino cherry.
That candy,
red,
that bright candy, yeah.
Right. So she said that she was really upset, but she said to us that she cut a deal with Mandela, that he claimed, I gave something away. I should take it back. When they spoke, he claimed that he kept open barrels of this runoff outside the factory, and that the bees, he saw them. He said, I would see the bees around. It was sugary stuff. They would always be drinking from it.
Sure.
She bought it. She said, that's, okay, but can you do me a favor? And she said, can you keep the barrels covered so that, the bees won't have the ability to get to the red dye and to drink this stuff, because it's ruining my business. He said, yes, no problem. She cuts a deal. She gives the story to the Times and says, Mandela is terrific. He understands. He's an environmentalist. Everything is good. We have a perfect situation. So I read this and I said, to myself, and excuse my French, I said, bullshit. This guy is full of shit, and sold her a bill of goods. It gave me an idea.
Illegal
We at
opening.
that, huh?
Illegal opening.
Yes, a legal opening. At that time, I had just established in the rackets division an environmental crimes unit that that was pretty active. We did a lot of, and if you didn't think that in Brooklyn there were environmental crimes, then you're mistaken. It's surrounded. I shouldn't say surrounded. It's, well, yeah, almost. I would say at least on, it's on part of Long Island, even though people don't know that, but it's on part of Long Island. It's got a lot of waterways, there are rivers, etc. So that's one of the places where environmental crimes could occur. There are a lot of things. We busted people who were taking fish, protected fish, out of the waterways, and it was a delicacy in Chinese restaurants all over the city, and those fish were protected and they weren't supposed to be taken. And we had people going out in the middle of the night fishing and taking this stuff and selling it later on the black market. So
I was going to say, even in northern New Hampshire, in the middle of fucking nowhere, you'll be out on some river or place that looks like humans haven't touched it in a million years, and 20 miles in, you'll see some agent sitting in a boat, making sure you're not like fishing or hunting where you're not. They look after it there. They're going to look after it in the city.
exactly.
They do. They hit you right when you think you can't get hit.
Yep. Well, that's exactly what we were doing in the environmental crimes unit. We had a great working relationship with the DEC, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Police. They don't have a lot of them, and they have to cover the entire state. But we were showing them that we had crimes in Brooklyn that they could investigate and should, and they did. So we had a great working relationship with them. So I read the article, and I call the chief of my environmental crimes unit into the office. Her name was Jackie Linares. And I said, Jackie, we got to take a look at this. I think, and you know how frustrated I am about the Maraschino cherry factory. I said, this may be our way in. Those bees are drinking that crap that they're using to dye those cherries. And I bet you dollars to donuts that they're not drinking it from barrels, but it's a runoff into the river. So she said, okay, let me talk to the guys, and we'll send them out there to do an inspection. Well, sure enough, the state went out there, went to the street. They found a runoff from the building, several runoffs. And where was it going? Directly into the sewer, not into a sewer, into a grate that was near the river. And from there, right into the river. So now what we had was enough to go into, once we tested the runoff, and it was red dye number 12, whatever the thing was. Sure. It was an agent that was not permitted to run into the river to pollute the river. And they said that this is a pollutant. It's not something that should be going into the river. I said, terrific. Now we're ready to go. What do you think happens? The district attorney that I worked for loses his election. And we, in a month or so, are out on our respective asses. That was it. The new DA who came in didn't want anything to do with me. He wanted me out. So I resigned before he called me in to fire me. And the reason that he didn't like me is because one of the people that you remember from Crooked Brooklyn, Clarence Norman, the head of the Democratic Party in Brooklyn, I locked up and sent to jail, locked him up and convicted him 3 times. Well, this was one of the new DA was one of his best friends. He grew up with him, and they were raised together. I was dead meat. So that was it. We couldn't do anything. We had the case, Tom. We had the Red Bees of Red Hook solve the problem for us. We were going to be able to get in there and find this marijuana farm, which I knew was there. So what happened? It was on hold. It was on hold. It was on hold. The new DA had no interest. A year after he's in office, He finally decides, and I'm told this by the guys and gals who used to work for me, that he was wanted to clear up and clean up old cases that were left hanging. But the Maraschino cherry factory case was one of them. I believe he recognized the same thing I did about the forfeiture aspect too. Yeah. So he said to the people who worked for me, the ones who were still left, let's put together a task force and get the warrant, and with DEC raid the place, and let's finally get into that basement. I knew what was going to happen. I knew that they were going to find this. I mean, I was as certain as you could possibly be. The smells, the dog, the informant, Greg listening, smelling the, walking into the factory and smelling it. But the red bees, the swarm of bees from Governor's Island was it. That was what did it for us. And that led me to DEC cops going to the factory, checking the runoff. And now we had a crime. We had an environmental crime, but a crime nonetheless. We now had enough for a warrant, and I couldn't do anything with it. I wasn't around to do it. I pick up the paper one morning, a year or so later, and I find out that sure enough, the new DA went into the factory and did a search warrant. And in Mandela's office, they found hidden behind a shelving unit was a secret door. And when they opened up the door, where do you think it went? Down to the basement. When they went down, there was a farm. It had just been harvested. They told me, and the newspaper said it, he must have cleared it out. I don't know if he got wind of the fact that there was a raid coming or whatever, but it was only thing left were the plants, the stubs of the plants that were, all of the leaves were harvested, etc. It was as frustrating as could possibly be, but it was not a clean warrant and a clean investigation. Why? Because instead of being careful and doing things the right way, they did it rushed, and the new DA left the particulars of the search warrant, in my opinion, to people who didn't have necessarily the right credentials or the proper credentials or the correct experience. I mean, I had George Terra and I had Joe Ponzi, who was the chief investigator, and I had Greg. These guys have been investigating cases for, forever, executing search warrants all the time, doing it the right way. These guys went in with the correct and legal search warrant, but what they forgot to do was to isolate the guy who was going to be arrested if they found anything, and that was Mandela. They did not check to see if he had any registered handguns or firearms in the place. And what happened was, during the course of the search warrant execution, the search, Mandela was able to get into that office, into his office, take out a handgun from his desk and kill himself in a place where there were tens of investigators. I mean, they were all over the place searching. DEC, investigators from the DA's office. There may have even been city cops, I don't recall. And here it is, the guy who was the target of the investigation is allowed to walk around and operate freely while they're searching. And he has a handgun and he kills himself.
And in your writing, you said he asked to use the restroom.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah. Went to the restroom and popped himself.
Killed himself. But the point is that gun was in his office, and they
could have been used to shoot it. Could have been used to shoot an officer.
Correct. That's the other part of this that was very scary to the guys that were there, because I spoke to people afterwards, and they were of course embarrassed. And the one investigator who had been working on the case for a while, for me and then obviously still there when I left, had been in the office for a good period of time. He was a good investigator, but not as experienced as he should have been. And he took the weight. Somebody had to be the fall guy, and he wound up taking it. Now, one other thing that also they had that I didn't is they had a whistleblower as well. They had a guy who worked in the factory for a long time. If I had him, then I would have been able to get the warrant even before the bees. He told us that, and told the DEC police and my investigators and the ADA who was working on the case, that the dumping was going on, the illegal dumping of the runoff was going on for a long time. It was not something that was new. And that he told them, he had warned Mandela, you're going to get caught. You can't do this. It's going to happen. And he told us about it. Now, that was also another piece that they were added to the application for the search warrant, was the information from this whistleblower, and which made them, which gave them security as far as the ability to go in. The bees were good. The bees were really all they needed, but having this whistleblower also helped. So, but it became, once this happened, the killing, Mandela killed himself, the entire story became like, it was stranger than fiction. And the red bees of Red Hook was the hook. That's another pun, but you missed me. You allowed me to.
No, I saw it happen. I saw it happen, but I let it go because I felt bad for you.
Was the hook that everybody needed to get to where we wanted to go. And as it turns out, Mandela's two daughters have taken over the business. They claim that they had no idea that their father was growing marijuana and had this marijuana business. Now, the question that everybody might have, because I had it, and everybody I tell the story to has it, is why would this guy kill himself over a marijuana arrest?
Well, is it because a solo operation or bigger?
And that's the thing. The thing is, was he beholden to someone? Was he working for someone? Was the money that he was making from the sale of marijuana going to places that other than into his pocket? Was he being protected, by certain groups in Brooklyn? And I think that your people know what I'm talking about. I was not in a position at that point to do anything, to do any investigating, because I wasn't in the office. But I did ask around, and they claim, meaning investigators who were there, said they had the idea that he might have been hooked up with some organized crime group, and that the mob may have been, part of the recipient of this money, or he was working on behalf of them, etc. But they claim that they have found no hard and fast evidence. But I find, I don't necessarily believe in coincidences. And the fact that this guy had this huge operation in a location that was industrial, but became over the years a very gentrified area where people from all walks of life were moving into Red Hook. Now, Red Hook is a place that is like a small town in the middle of, let's say, Massachusetts, like on the Cape. It's right on the water. There's only one way in from public transportation. That's a bus. There are no subway stops in Red Hook. The only way in is with a car or this bus. It's an area that that is a place unto itself.
Little idyllic, little.
Yeah. And you know what your backyard is? Your backyard is the East River.
Yeah.
Lower Manhattan, the beautiful skyline, Statue of Liberty. So there were people moving in. I mean, it was becoming a very, very big and gentrified area. IKEA, the big store, the big furniture store, has a place right on the river. There is Whole
Yeah,
Foods right on the river.
I've driven by that IKEA like massive super warehouse.
Yeah,
And yeah,
so there were people who, you know, who lived there, and this guy was able to kind of keep this whole marijuana thing on the down low until this informant gave us the first kernel of an investigation. Why? How was he being protected? Personally, and it's only my opinion, he had to have been. He had to have been. I believe at that point, for the time that we believe that he was selling this marijuana, when it was completely illegal, but it was lucrative. I mean, lucrative.
yeah,
There were all kinds of gangs looking to get in and selling it, and the penalties, unless you had a massive amount, Tom, under New York state law, you weren't going to jail.
yeah.
For a period. You weren't going to jail unless unless you're like him, where you had a factory filled, a factory in, or a farm, I should say, in the basement of this huge factory. So it's a question that remains unanswered. And, but I find that everyone that I tell this story to, some don't necessarily believe me. They said, no, it can't be. The bees. I said, I'm telling you the truth, that it was the bees. If not for the bees, the case would have sat in the bottom drawer of my desk until the time when I got kicked out of the DA's office. And I shouldn't say kicked out. I retired.
Sure.
But you know what I mean. It would have stayed there and never would have been resurrected. It would not have been. And Mandela would still be alive. And I venture to guess that he'd be selling, marijuana today, now even more out in the open, because it's totally legal. There's no,
might even open up a distribution, might even open up a dispensary.
Exactly. Right in this huge one square block factory in one of the most expensive areas of Brooklyn now, even though it's isolated. But I think that's what makes it expensive. And it's it's like one of these little niche places that people like to frequent. There are a lot of bars, restaurants, etc. But it's he would have been making a fortune, making more than he was making in the illegal business. So,
there's definitely, as everyone listens to this podcast knows, I always make weird analogies and connections, but this podcast, this is definitely added to my arsenal of connections, because I'm just thinking about how this is all an analogy for how the truth always comes out, whether it's something undeniable, like, burning an astronomer at the stake for thinking that the world is round instead of flat, or then eventually, you send up a rocket and you go, guess it is round. And, he gets vindicated. But I think this is a beautiful analogy for the truth in order to cover it up, you have to cover it up 100% of the time with 100% accuracy. And even something as simple as bees turning red, if you can find a thread, the thread will be pulled on enough until it leads back to the truth. And to me, there's something so fascinating about that, about how, even something like the Soviet Union, eventually it gets permeated and there's something beautiful about that. There's something like intimidating that the truth is it's kind of like a glacier. It's like, it might take 10,000 years, but it will bulldoze a mountain.
Yep. You know what I always said during the course of the corruption investigation I did with the judges and the politicians. People said to me, well, how could it have gone on that long? How could they have been so corrupt? The bottom line is nobody looked until I got involved. Nobody looked. Yeah. And the same thing with Mandela. Nobody looked. Who's gonna look? First of all, the runoff was at the back of the factory, running from the back of the factory into the river. Who was going to say, hey, that may be illegal?
Who gives a shit? Yeah. Who give? It's not like someone saw a pallet of like marijuana bricks.
Precisely.
If you see the red going off, that would be as inconsequential to you as if I saw that the recycling dumpster in my apartment complex was emptied twice a week instead of once. You don't give a shit. No, it doesn't even register.
It doesn't. And that's what he counted on. how he lived all these years with being able to do it without anybody finding out about it. He had himself covered by those bogus building plans in this, registered with the city without a basement even being, registered on the plans. So he was committing at that point pretty much the perfect crime. Nobody was bothering him. I wonder, and this is the other thing that I wonder, when I heard about him killing himself, and I know that the idea was that, maybe he didn't want the mafia to come and do him away, kill his family or do whatever, because they lost all that income. That may all be true, but I don't know. I truly believe that I should say that there's the possibility that he was distraught because he now brought shame to his family, to his grandfather, and to his father, who had a
100%.
legitimate business. And they had been in business, when I tell you, for decades in that spot, decades. And then people say, why did this guy sell marijuana when he had this thriving business? He had accounts, I'm telling you, Tom, all up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And I can't answer that other than greed is greed, and the other thing is, who's going to stop me? Nobody's going to look. No one's looking. So
see an opening.
Yeah.
See an opening, you see a market. Fuck it.
That's exactly.
Exactly it. It's kind of that ruthless nature that really did build a lot of America. It's not always good. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's steel plants and railroad companies. Sometimes it's, an underground weed farm. But there's kind of a terrible irony. And it's like, that is the sort of that mentality, that ruthless, cut all the corners, who's going to know. Might have been greed. I tend to think it's probably more along the lines of, the mafia hitting them versus it might just be like, I don't want to you hear it all the time. People
going out my own way.
Pedophiles that get caught, and so that there's a police standoff and then there's a single shot. It's not
plus he had the two daughters who were working in the factory, and he was in his own, screwed up mind. He was thinking, well, I got to protect them. I got to take myself out because
protect their name.
Somebody is going to come to them and take it out on them. It's really the real question mark and the mystery of the case. Obviously, we solved everything about the case except why he killed himself, and that's still unknown. And even his daughters. If you read things, and there's been a lot of articles written about this case from not my point of view, obviously, or the investigative point of view, but from the point of view of the family, of his daughters and what they remember about their grandfather and what they were told about their great grandfather and about the business and about their dad. It's really a tragedy from when you think about it from that point of view, because here's a guy who was a thriving businessman. He did not have to take himself out under any circumstance to basically survive. If we burnt the entire marijuana farm out from under him, this guy had a thriving business for which his family which supported his family for decades. So the mystery is still there, and the daughters can't figure out why their father took himself out and killed himself. It's just it was a tragedy. I have to tell you, I was shocked when I read it. Shocked. I couldn't believe that a guy who obviously had the wherewithal to run the Maraschino cherry factory business and the marijuana business and to keep it as silent was not a dumb guy. He was not someone who had something. He may have had a screw loose. I don't know, but he was not a dumb guy. And why he would decide to take himself out is a mystery. It really is. And think about what I said before about how protective he was of that place. He wouldn't let he had to have also one other thing. When the generators needed repair, he only allowed one particular repairman to come and do what was necessary to service the generators. And he and that one repairman were the only people in there. That's how secretive he was about the and the idea that the entrance was hidden behind shelving in his own private office was another indication of how secretive he was about this, you know. And so not a dumb man, a guy who, you know, who was able to put together another business in addition to the one that his family built, and yet, you know, ended tragically. It's a real sad story, I think. I really do.
You know, that level of secrecy might have also been, you know, just so his family doesn't know shit about it, in terms of it's just like, no, this money's coming from the business. And you find out,
Sure.
you know, you find out your dad's you know, a drug kingpin. Sure, it might tarnish that. Mike, tell everyone where they can get your book. I got to use the restroom real quick, but I have a couple questions about this that I want to ask. Tell them where to find your books and your writings and shit.
Okay. The book is Crooked Brooklyn, and it can be found on Amazon. Could be found in, you know, on any online bookseller. The first book was Friends of the Family, about the infamous mafia cops case involving two New York City detectives who were on the payroll of the mob, killing people on behalf of the mob, and brought to justice finally after they retired from the PD and were out and about for probably about 10 years until we got a hold of the case. Crooked Brooklyn, as I said before, is about my 8 or 9 years as the chief of the rackets division, where we took down judges and took down politicians and took down crooked cops. And the book that is the most recent is called Behind the Murder Curtain. And it's about doctors and nurses who, for the most part, were working in veterans hospitals in various parts of the country, who were killing their patients, poisoning them for different reasons. One doctor was just simply a sociopath who liked to watch people die, believe it or not. And it's a great read. And, you know, now that there's a TV show called, it's coming out, I think, or it may be out already, called Dr. Death. It's pretty much the same kind of story as the first story, or the first part of Behind the Murder Curtain, with Dr. Swango in our book. I don't know the name of the Dr. Death in the TV show, but I mean, Swango was just a complete psycho. And the next one that's coming out is called Homicide is by Business. It's about a hitman from Sicily who comes to the United States looking to become a man of honor. And the question is, what is honorable in his mind, and what is honorable in terms of our minds? And he is a colorful guy, and it's I think a terrific story about how he gets involved with the Brooklyn mob, how he gets involved with various aspects of international criminal, he gets involved with an international criminal who wants him to, who was responsible for taking down the Vatican Bank, and the criminal wants my guy Luigi to kill a prosecutor and a judge in Italy because he's going to get caught. And he winds up, last but not least, he winds up being involved with a very notorious drug smuggling operation called the Pizza Connection. And it involved smuggling of drugs from Sicily into Canada and then into the United States in pizza supplies, cans of olive oil, cans of tomato sauce, mozzarella, and then it was picked up and distributed throughout the United States. And Luigi was one of the distributors and involved in going to various parts of the country to pick up the drugs and bring them back to Brooklyn. He testified in front of Congress, Ronald Reagan's Commission on Organized Crime. And he testified at the Pizza Connection trial. He gets cold feet after testifying and tries to recant his testimony and creates a whole other problem for himself. So it's I believe a fascinating story, even if I do say so myself. And I think that it's a book that people are going to enjoy because it's truly one of these things that the truth being stranger than fiction. I mean, I couldn't make up a character like this guy if I sat around for 10 years trying to think up a hitman like him. I couldn't do it. So, I'm hoping that everybody will buy it when it comes out. And I know Tom has already promised me to come on the show and to talk about it. It have to involve several podcasts, Tom, because there are various aspects to the story that need to be explained themselves as opposed to as a one particular total. So
well, I have an endless need for content, so it works out good.
Great.
So for your to the civil forfeiture, is there any conflict of it's kind of like it's kind of like when businesses or it's like, right, because I'm a fat ass and on Fridays I order Domino's and they always tell you on the little app, they're like, our delivery drivers get less than minimum wage, they count on tips. And sure, I get it, I've done delivery before, I've been a delivery driver for Chinese food, it sucks and tips are awesome. At the same time, it's kind of like, why is this huge corporation kind of what word am I looking for, outsourcing their payment to the hey, you already bought the pizza, but you also got to tip our delivery drivers because we're not paying them a living wage. And it's just kind of like, what? That's kind of seems like a shitty thing to do. Like, you're just kind of guilt tripping me to do it. Is there any conflict of interest to, let's say, someone in state government or federal, and this could be for any agency, but let's just use yours for example, of someone going, we're going to cut their budget, but that will just light a little fire under their ass to maybe go after some more civil forfeitures so they can get their budget for this. And does that create an artificial, right? It's kind of like people saying, don't drive fast at the end of the month because there are cops looking for their quota or something. Is there, and I mean, I know I'm shading this question in a way that, it's, would make police forces look bad, but is that ever a conflict of interest? Like, ooh, our budget's low, let's really ratchet it up and let's bust this guy who maybe we normally wouldn't have gone after with a vengeance.
I guess it's possible because anything is possible. And it could be unscrupulous prosecutors who would do that. In my experience with the 5 DAs the one I worked for and the other 4 in the city, that was not the case.
Sure.
Didn't have to be, because for instance, I told you before, the Manhattan DA's office was awash with forfeiture. They didn't have to go and manufacture, and the city never cut their budget.
Sure.
What they did just the opposite. At some point, the city said, you know what, you have so much forfeiture, share it with some of the other agencies. And they made, they shared it, but they certainly didn't give us the bulk of it until there came a point when the DA in Manhattan said, you know what, we will share some of this. So to answer your question is, sure, anything is possible. I don't see it. And the forfeiture is basically, you're allowed to take what is either the result of the crime or an instrumentality of the crime. So if, if for instance, in Mandela case, if he obviously was using this building as an instrumentality of the crime, therefore it was forfeitable.
Okay.
So it's not that easy unless you have, an organization to make real money, unless you have an organization like, organizations on Wall Street or heavy banks or Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff had to give back millions and millions and millions. And there were people who were assigned, there was one guy assigned to gather all of his, all of the results of his crimes and the things that his crimes paid for, like his house and like his apartment in Manhattan and like the silverware in his house, and sell it and then give it to reimbursed victims. And keep in mind, forfeiture also goes to the victims. It's not just kept by the DA's office. It's if there are victims, then they get there's forfeiture. Like for instance, in the case in Crooked Brooklyn of the doctor who was selling body parts that he was taking out of cadavers without permission. Well, when he was convicted, the families of those unfortunate deceased were able to get reimbursement for, for pain and suffering and for stuff like that. And that all came from forfeiture money. He sold his mansion in Jersey, and there were other things that we were able to latch on to forfeit. So, and I'll give you one other example. We did a case once with a loan shark who was arrested. And when he was arrested, when we did a search of his home and his garage, it turns out that he had millions of dollars worth of baseball and sports memorabilia, all purchased with the illegal proceeds of his loan sharking business. So what we did was we set up an auction and auctioned off all of this stuff. And if we could identify a victim, then the victim had to just simply file a request for reimbursement, and we paid it off. Otherwise, that money went into the DA's coffers, and it can't be used for personal items. I mean, it's law enforcement purposes, So, so I have not, I've not seen anything that would give rise to me saying that, it's a conflict of interest.
Sure.
I never saw anything like that. But I've been around too long, and I know that anything is possible.
Someone somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. And that's not me personally grilling you so much as it's a question that popped in my head. And then I was like, well, I have to ask that, I can't tiptoe around it. Just like it popped into my head that, there are corrupt people, and I'm not saying it would be like an institutionalized, this is what cops are. I mean, you don't, again, like you said, you don't know what assholes in what precinct and who knows what they're doing but then on the other hand, I mean, there's a guy I'm having on Friday who was a whistleblower against UBS, the international bank,
right,
in like the mid 2000s. And, there was a whistleblower reward where he would get a percentage of what was repatriated to the United States and lost taxes. And, the people that were the lawyers that were arguing against him were like, this guy's just in it for the money. And on one hand, you can go, sure. But on the other hand, it's like, if he's getting 20%, but they're bringing back 80% that was defrauded from the U.S. government, to me, that's just like capitalism. That's just adding a little incentive. Like, who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Like, it got done. This guy would have otherwise not done it because multi-trillion-dollar banking corporations would have no problem hiring someone to have you found in a ditch somewhere. So no, it's I'm just more so just thinking out loud.
And it's not necessarily, it's not that a guy is in it for the money. It's, did he make something up so that he would get the money? If he's giving legitimate, truthful information,
which he did,
well, that's what he's getting paid for. He's not he's not on salary to the government to get the stuff. So he hears it, and the incentive is, we're going to give you a piece. I mean, it's absolutely, and it's up to the authorities to do what we did. You've got to make sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed legally before you do a forfeiture case. So, it's not just, okay, that's it, it's all ours. The guy has the right, and the defendant has the right to even challenge it. Even if he's convicted, he has the right to challenge it, because we'd have to prove that it was either the instrumentality of the crime or the proceeds of the crime. So,
and there's some, like, you come for the king, you best not miss. Like, if you fuck it up, they're gonna plug, just kind of, it's like, did he trim and sell all the plants? UBS started plugging up all of their holes. Right. They started shutting down all these departments. And you're right, this guy that I'm having on Friday, Brad Birkenfield, what was repatriated to the U.S. was $780 million. And he ended up getting like $100 million of that, but not after he was before which he was thrown in prison when he reported to the FBI. And it's come out that the FBI was taking orders from higher up politicians, because who are their campaign donors? The rich motherfuckers storing the money. And so it's, and the thing is when this guy did blow the whistle, it was years before there was ever a whistleblower award. So no, you're right. It's not, but for me, it's more so just trying to entertain all ideas, right? It's, there is a reason for all of it, but it's also, you do have to add a little incentive. I'm not doing this podcast at a charity. I got into medical school. I could be a doctor. Instead, I'm like, fuck it. I think I can make more doing this podcast. And it's a risk, and you go out and you might fall flat in your face, but there's also the thought of reward. Second question.
Hey, this is America, right?
Exactly.
Everybody has the right to make it better themselves. Yes.
Goddamn right it is.
What's the other question?
And then we'll wrap it up with this is with like parallel construction, where it's like, you can't drop the drone, and maybe this might go beyond the scope of where you work. This might be more like CIA, NRO, National Reconnaissance Office shit. But with parallel construction, where they don't want to burn sources and methods. So let's say with some Patriot Act amendment, you guys were able to just go bust in the door and say, we had reason, it's in New York, you were funding whatever. If it comes out in like the hearing, like, oh, we knew that there was a pipe that smelled of marijuana. Well, now the guy knows, oh, that was one of my employees, and now you're fucking him. And something like an intelligence agency might not want that guy fucked. Let's say this wasn't just one cherry plant. Let's say this thing was 100 times larger. They still want their inside man, right? It's, if you're using surveillance cameras on, some VIP, you're not necessarily going to show the camera angle you used, because now they can go look back and go, oh, that was in my bathroom. I only have one maid. Now I'm going to kill my maid. With like parallel construction, is there ever any like, I don't even really know what my question was with this. Do you have to be careful with how you go about, we're going to drop a sensor into the, or whatever, a drone into the
probe,
chimney? Yeah, probe.
Of course, there's, I think I know what your question is. Do you have to be considerate of the person who started this with the piece of information, the employee of the marijuana, of the Maraschino cherry factory? Of course you do. That's why you do the kind of work that we did, so that we don't have to use the information given to us by the first informant in the application for the search warrant. That's one of the reasons why we tried so hard with the dog and with the probe and with getting on the roof to smell it, because it's so simple to get the warrant without having to give up the informant. Now, also the warrant, there are provisions in a warrant, a state warrant, that allow you to say that the informant, the initial informant, should remain anonymous as long as you can establish that he is reliable or she is reliable. Now, how do you do that? Well, because we sent the probe down, because we had a guy go in on the roof and smell it, because a dog hit it. So you don't have to ever say that it's an employee. And the guy had like hundreds of employees, so he wouldn't have known which guy did it. But yes, the answer to your question is yes. That's the primary responsibility you have, is to protect the informant and the informant's identity under all circumstances. And in my opinion, if you can't do that, then you give up the case. I'm not going to sacrifice some guy's life or livelihood because he gave me information. That's not the way I operated, and I would never do that.
Yeah.
The bees were perfect. It was a perfect cover, perfect cover. And the way to handle it is very simple. The DEC does regular inspections. They went to the street. We don't need a warrant to go into the street.
Yeah.
The bees told us that there might be a problem. We went there, we found the problem, end of story. Warrant granted, and they go in. So
it's kind of like,
it's a perfect way of doing it without having to involve the informant.
It's kind of like, there's an art to it, right? I mean, it's like getting Al Capone for tax evasion. Like
there is
find what you can get and hit them on it.
Hey, look, even now when I write these books and these stories, if there's like when I write this story, there's no way that I would ever mention this guy's name.
Oh,
ever,
sure.
Ever.
Yeah.
And the idea of just simply saying, we had this guy who was an informant, that to me is perfectly okay, because nobody is going to think back as to who this guy was. And, that's just the way it has to be. I mean, you're talking about now, let's see, we're in 2021. We're talking about at least 8 to 9 to 10 years ago. So even if I to mention, I wouldn't mention his name, but I
Even if
wouldn't
you
even think
did.
about mentioning it, even though 10 years have passed.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, no, I got you. Again, just that's a random question that popped in my head. Very last question is just popped into my head is, man, you gotta wonder, was his old man and or his grandpa, did they all have this basement racket going? Was it a speakeasy back in the day? You know,
There could have been.
maybe.
We never went that deep into it at that point. And clearly, when the bees came about and we were able to get the warrant, I was gone. So there was
Yeah.
never any way of knowing it. But
Yeah, I don't know how
is
you
it
could,
beyond the
yeah.
realm of possibility? Absolutely not. Absolutely
is-
not. I don't think it was a marijuana factory. I think that if they did do something down there, it was something else. If they
Sure.
did, I'm not sure that they did.
Man, it's got to make you think how many, like, whatever basements or the equivalent of are just in whatever neighborhood and in whatever thing. You have no idea what's going on, right? It's
Yep.
just right underneath the surface. Let's wrap this one up. Mike Vecchione, I'll put all your books in the description as always. And
don't forget the 2 short stories.
2 short stories.
Hand of the Killer.
Hand of the Killer.
The ones that are
and Murder
published
on,
anyway.
Yeah,
And
Murder on the Bridge.
Murder on the Bridge. Yep.
And yeah, I have all the links. I'll put them all in there, and we'll set up next month's episode. And yeah, man. Until
Great.
then,
Thank you, Tom.
hey, man, thank you for coming on here. You always say thank you for having me on. You give me great content, dude, so I appreciate it. You good?
We're good. Are you good?
Oh yeah, no, your image just completely froze up, and you're staring at me. I was like,
no, I'm here.
I was like, what happened? What's happened? But let's wrap this one up. I'll send it to you when it's uploaded, and I'll text you, and we'll set up the next episode. All right?
Terrific. And you have the other stories I sent you, right? We can do one of
Absolutely. We can choose any of those.
Yeah. Did I send you one involving a
You sent me. I think
the
you sent
sale-
me 2 emails with 2.
Yeah, I sent you 3 altogether. One of them was the sale of sale of used condoms. Does that ring a bell with you?
No, but I feel like that has to be the next episode now.
No, I didn't send that one to you.
No, I think you did. I clicked on the first one and I read
okay.
I literally was in bed and I read the whole marijuana.
Yeah,
and the
read
bees,
it.
and I
If
was,
that's
all right.
not- And I know I sent you the one with the guy who dressed up as his mother. And
Well, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
my logic was if there are 3, then I knew we were going to do 3 episodes. So I read the
Okay,
first
great.
one, was like, I like that one. I guess I didn't glance at the selling used condoms, but now that has to be the next episode.
yeah,
because
that's a good. That's
I
a good
can't
start.
I can't not deliver on that outro. So, Mr. Vecchione, thank you so much, sir, and thank you for your time. God bless America, and until next time, my man.
Okay, man.
Take
Stay
care.